To gain a better understanding of the challenging concept of design, let's take a look at positive negative shape and get into a few other terms called figure ground. So we know that the box that a composition is designed in is called the format. So I'll be using that term a lot in the upcoming examples. So that's what composition is. It involves successfully placing visual elements inside a format, and that requires design. So visual elements are things like images and textures, colors, values, shapes, lines. And so as an artist, you have to decide where these visual elements go inside that box, and that's design. Now, consider this to better understand what I mean by design. The image on the left is a dog drawn, say, on the page of a sketchbook. So sometimes I refer to that as like a spot illustration. Now compare that to what we see on the right side. That I would call a composition, because the artist has not only drawn the dog, but also considered the space around the dog. Here's another example, not just a drawing now, but an actual painting. So the dog on the left, really nice watercolor painting of a dog. The artist has considered a little bit of the space around the dog because the grass is starting to be suggested. But notice with the artwork on the right, the artist has considered the entire space within the format. The artist has designed all of that space. So that's what we're talking about when we're referring to design. So as soon as you place a visual element like a shape inside a box, you automatically create shapes around that main shape. So in other words, the gray shape is there and it's occupying a lot of space inside that box, but then all those white spaces around the artwork are part of the artwork too. And so that's where design comes in, when we want to develop that space also. Now, compare this example with the last example. So what I've done here is I've actually enlarged the positive shape, the gray shape, so that it extends right off the composition. Now it's even more obvious that I have created individual pieces of white shape. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. 8. Did I count that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. Okay, so 8 white shapes, 1 gray shape. So the gray shape rather, we call the positive shape. The white spaces we call the negative shape. And so I just want you to notice that the nature of the negative shape is determined by the nature of the positive shape. So in other words, this negative shape up here in the top right corner has those contours because of the horse's mane. And it has this particular size because of how the horse's head and the jockey's head extend right off the edge of the format. So positive shape in turn creates negative shape. Here's a more practical example. We have one positive shape set in a format, and always remember that the shape of the format is a very important consideration that the artist must make. So this one is narrow and tall, and that's on purpose because the artist strategically extended many parts of the salsa dancer right off the format. By doing so, by having her right arm extended behind her, and by extending that right arm and the skirt right off the left side of the format, the artist has therefore created negative shape number 1. And the extension of the right arm separates negative shape 1 from negative shape 2. The left arm is raised, it's holding a fan. The fan is extending off the format. The fan is overlapping the head. Therefore, negative shape 2 is separated from negative shape 3, and negative shape 3 separated from negative shape 4. You get the idea. So that's all part of design. One positive shape. That includes the poles that the skier is holding, by the way. Any object that's touching another object becomes those two objects rather become one overall object. It's almost like in math class when you learn about composite shapes made from individual shapes being combined or overlapped. But if you study all the numbers in this painting, you can see that there are at least 8 individual negative shapes, and they are all created because of how the skier's body is positioned, how his individual body parts interact with one another, like how the skis are crossed over, or his right arm is bent and his right hand is in front of his hip. Could be a lady, I guess, him or her. And then also because of how some of the positive shape extends off the format. We have, say, negative shape 5 broken up from negative shape 7. Sometimes artists break up negative shapes into sub-shapes. So where those 2 gray arrows are pointing technically is one big negative shape, but the artist has broken it into 2 shapes by using 2 different values / colors, yellow and orange. I say values because yellow is a lighter value than orange. So big negative shapes usually require that in order to break from monotony and create visual complexity. You want to break them into smaller sub-shapes. The same thing happens on the right side of the painting. This is all one big piece of negative shape, but the artist has broken it into 1, 2, almost 3 sub-shapes. So cool. Another example of one positive shape, 9 negative shapes. Again, this artist has strategically extended the positive shape, the musician, right off the composition. On all 4 sides, actually. Now, what if there's more than one main shape? What if there's more than one positive shape? Like in this case, we have 3 koi fish. Well, this is what artists do then. They strategically group the positive shape by overlapping them, making them touch, in order to create what we call a figure. Our brains automatically consider these 3 women to be one shape because they are all touching. Our brain is constantly looking for simplicity and order in the visual world, especially when we look at design, like artwork. And so it's a good design move to group positive shape to create one overall figure. Here's another example where the 2 fishermen in the boat are all touching. They're all grouped together to create a figure. That creates simplicity, and it creates some great emphasis of the positive shape. This is an interesting piece of art, a bunch of lily pads and flowers, and then we have the subject, a man with a flower head. But notice how all the lily pads and flowers and the man are all touching or very, very close to touching. And so in my representation on the right, you can clearly see what our brain sees. We perceive all those shapes to be one overall positive shape, which we call the figure. And then all the other negative shapes, we give the special term ground. So ground is another name for a negative shape. So keep in mind that the figure ground and their characteristics are all determined by the specific grouping of the positive shape. So the horses in the first example on the far left are grouped differently than they are in the center. And then another factor is how much space the positive shape takes up within the composition. So the composition, or the figure grouping on the far right, is the same as it is on the far left. The difference, though, is that I've cropped in, or I've enlarged the figure or the positive shape to extend off 2 sides of the format, the top and bottom. And that in turn changes the negative shape. It actually makes it smaller, which is a good thing. We always want the positive shape to dominate the composition. So we want to make it nice and big. Here's some student examples. So it's all the same drawing, actually. So this student has strategically grouped the 4 fish. Now notice how the fish at the top is not touching the other 3, but it's close enough that our brain associates it as being part of the figure. But just notice that the cropping is different in each case. So the space, the negative shape around the positive shape, it varies because of how large the figure is. So sometimes you need to recrop a composition after you have your positive shape situated or placed exactly where you want it. So what that statement there says is where we're headed. That's how I want you to think. I always want you to think about both the positive and negative shape, and I want you to realize that they both are shapes that need considering. So here we have all the ladies and the candles. Those are the positive shapes. Maybe it's easier if I show it to you like this. And then all the space in between the candles and the women are the negative shape. So the women are the figure. Those dark spaces are the ground. Notice how the women are all strategically grouped. They're all touching. So this is a great example of a well-designed composition. Here's another example. It's actually a student example. So 4 fish, but strategically grouped to create a figure. And then the dark space around the fish would be the ground. That's it. Design well. Figure ground.